Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a new installment in the Brews from Scratch series where I record myself building a deck completely from the beginning and talking you through all my thought process as I'm going. And in this episode I'm going to be going over Ancient Imperiosaur Elves in Historic. So this is a new card from the latest set. It's a 7 mana 6/6 Trample Ward 2, but it has Convoke, which means that we can obviously cheat it into play for a lot cheaper, and it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it for each creature that convoked it. So the idea with this card is we're trying to swarm the battlefield really quickly with a bunch of cheap creatures to be able to convoke this out as maybe like a 16/16, 18/18, or ideally a 20/20 with Trample and Ward 2 that can just close the game out really quickly. So the inspiration for me to build around this card definitely came from Aspiring Spike. I've been watching a ton of his videos recently. He's a really great brewer. I'll leave a link down to his YouTube in the description. Definitely check him out if you get the time. And he's been playing with this in Modern, and it's a card that I've been wanting to try in a while, and he's also been brewing it with Fierce Empath, which I think is a really great synergy here, because if you're building around the Imperiosaur, you want to guarantee that you have a lot of chances to find it, and Fierce Empath is really nice because it's just a creature that can find the Imperiosaur. So there's a couple of ways that we can build around this card. First of all, you can go kind of all in on just trying to swarm the battlefield as quickly as possible with cards like Ornithopter and Gleeful Demolition, alongside stuff like maybe Voldaren Epicure in order to consistently have an artifact in play. You could run like Burning Tree Emissary and Chatterstorm, and then you can also run Torch Courier as a way to not only convoke the Imperiosaur but also give it haste. Yeah, for some reason my text isn't coming up in the search box. Has anyone else got that, or is it just me maybe? But anyway, yeah, you can, if you're running a Gruul version of the deck, you can run stuff like Torch Courier to then give the Imperiosaur haste, and it plays kind of more like a combo deck. But I'm personally not a huge fan of that idea, because I just feel like it's a little bit too all in, right? If your whole plan revolves around getting Imperiosaur in play and the opponent has a Thoughtseize and takes away your Empath or your Imperiosaur, you're kind of just left with a bunch of 1/1s that don't really do that much if the opponent has any blockers in play. So look, the idea I wanted to try is building with Elves instead, because Elves is one of the best ways that you can swarm the battlefield and go wide pretty quickly. And on top of that, Fierce Empath is an elf itself, so it plays really nicely with the synergies. So the most important cards for Imperiosaur in the elf tribe are probably Dwynen's Elite and Elvish Warmaster, because these are both cards that they're only 2 mana and they can put 2 bodies on the battlefield, or in the case of Warmaster, you can actually get multiple on the battlefield. So, you know, like I said, as long as we've got another elf in play, which we almost certainly will, this produces an extra body. And same thing with Warmaster. As we play more elves, we can just swarm the battlefield with tokens, which then enables us to more easily convoke into the Imperiosaur. We also obviously have the 1 mana Mana Dorks, which are huge as well. You know, this is a really great way for us to commit to the battlefield that also plays really nicely with the elf synergies in general. So we definitely want the 4 Elvish Mystic, 4 Llanowar Elves, just to give the deck some acceleration. And also, you know, this will help us not only ramp into our powerful elves like Fierce Empath and Elvish Archdruid, which I'm sure we're going to be running as well, but they also enable us to just commit to the battlefield quickly so that we can then more easily convoke the Imperiosaur as well. I also think I'm pretty interested in running 4 Jasper Sentinel, because having played a lot of elves and trying to get this deck to work in best of 3, the difference in speed between hands where you have a turn 1 mana dork and the ones where you don't is night and day. It's such a big difference. And the big issue with Jasper Sentinel is, you know, first of all, it's definitely worse than Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves, but for the purposes of this deck, I don't think it's as bad. You know, the big weakness of Jasper Sentinel traditionally is that the 3 drops are really important. Speaking of which, we're definitely going to be having Elvish Archdruid in the deck because it's just the best card in the whole tribe, essentially. But typically the big weakness of Jasper Sentinel compared to Mystic and Llanowar Elves is that we can't play Elvish Archdruid on turn 2 off it, which is a pretty big deal. But in this particular list, because we're just trying to, you know, swarm the battlefield as quickly as possible, I still think Sentinel is going to be really nice, because we can go like turn 1 Jasper Sentinel into turn 2 Warmaster, tap the Warmaster to then cast like an Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, or Allosaurus Shepherd, for example, and then get another token immediately, which plays really nicely with the Imperiosaur plan. And I've always kind of wanted to run builds that have all 12 mana dorks, but the issue with this is that you're just going to end up with really awkward hands where you have a bunch of one mana dorks and not really much to do with it. But because we're running Imperiosaur and Fierce Empath, I think that's a good enough reason to be running the 4 Jasper Sentinel, which is pretty nice. I also definitely want to be running the Allosaurus Shepherds. The really nice thing about the Shepherd here is, first of all, it gives all of our green spells uncounterable, which is really nice with the Imperiosaur, right? The big weakness of this against a control deck, for example, is if you take your turn off convoking all your creatures so you don't attack, to cast this and the opponent just uses an Archmage's Charm or something, that's a real blowout. So having Shepherd as a way to give your Imperiosaur uncounterable is really nice. And also it just works really nicely with the backup plan that we've got in this deck, right? The nice thing about running this in the Elves tribe is if we can't get the Imperiosaur off for whatever reason, we can often just win by going wide and then boosting our whole board with the Shepherd or the War Master. So there's a ton of really nice synergy here that I like quite a lot. So what I'm going to do now, these are kind of like the cards that I was almost certain I'd be running in the deck. We are at 60 cards already, but since we're running 12 mana dorks, I think we can go as low as 20 lands for sure. So what I'm going to do now is just go through and search all the elves and just go through and see if there are any ones that I might have missed out that could work nicely here. So didn't really see any more in the 1-drop slot, and we've already got 16 1-drops. I don't really think we want that many more 1-drops unless there's something that works really nicely with the Imperiosaur, for example. Then 2-drops, I mean, we've got a lot of good options here, right? We've got Elvish Visionary, which is pretty nice, but again, I think before I go through the rest of the cards, I'm basically looking here to see if I can find an elf that is better to run than Collected Company, because I think even though we're not running a ton of 3-drops, which you typically want for Collected Company, I still think it's probably, I would definitely be interested in running Company in this deck because we can ramp into it fairly easily. We can use it to find Empath, which can then find Imperiosaur. We can obviously find the Archdruid, and even the 1 and 2-drops like Shepherd and War Master are pretty nice to hit off Collected Company. So when I'm looking through the elves here, I want to be trying to find something that might be worth running instead of Collected Company, because that's kind of like the default last card I'm looking to add to the deck right now. So Visionary is pretty nice, but I don't think it's probably better than Collected Company. We've got some Lord effects here. So we've got Clan Caller, but Clan Caller is largely worse than Leaf Crown Visionary, so this is definitely a potential option. I'll add it to the deck for now, and then we'll go through the others and see if there's anything better. So other 2-drops, nothing here really stands out to me too much, really. Circle of Dreams Druid is an interesting card. I'm pretty high on this in general in the Elves shell, because alongside it basically just gives you extra redundancy for the Archdruid style effect so that you can more consistently activate your Shepherds and your War Masters, but I don't think it really plays particularly well with the Imperiosaur game plan, because rather than trying to produce a bunch of green, we're trying to just get a bunch of cards on the battlefield. Like, we actively want to convoke this rather than ramping into it off like a Circle of Dreams Druid. So I do like this card in Elves in general, but I'm not sure it synergizes super well with the Imperiosaur game plan. So Freyalise is definitely a card I'll be interested in the sideboard. Like, Control has always been the worst matchup for Elves, and Freyalise has always been a really good card to help in that matchup a lot. So definitely want this in the sideboard for sure. Again, we've got more Lord effects, but I think the 2-mana Lords are just a lot better than Imperious Perfect. Marwyn is another card that is, more redundancy for the Archdruid style effect, but I think Circle of Dreams Druid is largely better, and that's not making the cut in this particular build, so I don't think Marwyn makes the cut here either. Reclamation Sage is a nice sideboard card for sure. I think, Fade from History is a card that I think is definitely worth considering in the sideboard right now, because it's so good against all of the artifact decks like Affinity and Hammer Time and stuff like that. But I think in this particular list, because we want creatures for the Imperiosaur, and we're kind of likely to be running Collected Company as well. I haven't really seen much else scrolling through here outside of the Leaf Crown Visionary that could be a consideration. And if we do end up running Company, then I think Rex Sage is a great sideboard option there as well. Steel Leaf Champion is a card that I think is kind of underrated, and I don't think it's going to fit in this particular build, but it's a card I've been thinking about in Elves in general, because one of the big weaknesses of Elves in the format right now is Brotherhood's End, and having Steel Leaf Champion survive Brotherhood's End is pretty sweet. So if I was going to build an Elves deck without Imperiosaur, Steel Leaf Champion is something that I think is underplayed, potentially in Elves, because it does give the deck some protection from Brotherhood's End, but definitely doesn't really fit in this build particularly well. And then we're already on to 4-drops here. I don't think we're going to be running any 4-drops at all. So I guess the question now is whether we would prefer to be running the Leaf Crown Visionary or Collected Company. And Leaf Crown Visionary is obviously an incredibly good card. It feels kind of weird running an Elves deck without it, but I think Collected Company is going to be better in this particular build, because not only does it help us find Fierce Empath, which finds Imperiosaur, and all of our other pieces, but it also just puts multiple bodies on the battlefield. So if we happen to have an Empath or an Imperiosaur in hand, playing Collected Company and hitting like War Master and Dwayne's Elite immediately just puts 4 bodies on the battlefield, which can potentially allow us to just convoke the Imperiosaur. So I think I am probably going to go for Collected Company over the Leaf Crown Visionary in this particular build, and we'll see how it works. If I end up not being too impressed with Collected Company because we're not running too many 3-drops, then I could see swapping it back, but overall, I think I'm pretty happy with this so far. In terms of, like, normally I'll like stop the recording and then build the mana base separately. But in a monocolored deck, I think it's, you know, it's actually more interesting. You know, typically when I'm building a multicolored deck, it's referencing Frank Carsten articles and seeing how many colored sources of each I need. Whereas in a monocolored deck, you know, I think it's going to be pretty simple here. So the options that we have in monocolored for the mana base, definitely want to run 1 Boseiju for sure. Since we're probably going to be going down to 20 lands, I really don't think I want to be running 2 of these, because having the two lands that you have in your opening hand be 2 Boseijus is an absolute nightmare. Castle Garenbrig is a card that I'm pretty interested in here because I'm only running the 4 Archdruid as ways to produce a ton of mana, and we will, I imagine, want to be activating Warmaster and Allosaurus Shepherd a decent amount of the time, and Castle Garenbrig allowing us to do that ahead of curve is pretty sweet, so that's definitely a consideration. The last card that I'm potentially interested in here as well is Turntimber Symbiosis, because we're probably going to be in mono green unless, you know, I play and think that we need to splash in another colour for the sideboard, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be in mono green, and Turntimber Symbiosis is a really nice payoff if we do end up flooding out, and we can also use it to potentially get Imperiosaur into play. You know, we won't get any of the extra +1/+1 counters, but getting a 6/6 Trample Ward 2 into play is pretty nice. And then obviously if we hit like an Archdruid or a Fierce Empath, we also get the +1/+1 counters on it. Now, my concern with Turntimber Symbiosis in this particular build is that we don't have that high density of stuff that can produce a ton of mana, right? We've only got Archdruid. If we were running Circle of Dreams Druid as well, then I think I'd be more interested in the Turntimber Symbiosis. And because we're only running the Archdruid as a way to produce a bunch of mana, I think that means that we're probably more reliant on Castle Garenbrig to consistently be able to activate Allosaurus Shepherd or Warmaster without the Archdruid. And because I kind of want to be running the 4 Castle Garenbrig, I don't really think we can afford to run Turntimber Symbiosis as well, because you know, say we wanted to run two Turntimber Symbiosis, we would only be able to run 13 basic forests, which means that in a 20 land deck, I think with this configuration here, you're pretty likely to end up in situations where you have like a Turntimber Symbiosis and a Castle Garenbrig, or you have like a Boseiju or Castle Garenbrig, or 2 Castle Garenbrigs as the lands in your opening hand, and it's an absolute nightmare in this deck to have to mulligan a hand because you've got tapped lands. So I think because of that reason, I'm not going to run any Turntimber Symbiosis in the mana base, and I'm just going to go with the 15 forests here, and then the consistency of the mana base should be there for sure, right? We should be able to have a forest to go alongside the Garenbrig to then consistently activate the Allosaurus Shepherd or the Warmaster. So that was pretty quick. I mean, I'm pretty happy with this main deck so far. It looks pretty nice, right? We can swarm the battlefield really quickly. We have a ton of 1-drops. We can ramp. We've got Elite and Warmaster, which can flood the battlefield. And the nice thing, we've got some nice synergy here with Archdruid and Imperiosaur, because both of these cards want us to swarm the battlefield pretty quickly. So the main deck looks pretty nice to me. I'm excited to try this out. In terms of the sideboard, so what have we got so far? We've got Freyalise, which looks pretty nice to me. You know, I think Control is still going to be the roughest matchup, and Freyalise is really good there. And I also like Reclamation Sage. One other card that I really want to be running here is Shaper's Sanctuary, because Rakdos can also be a tricky matchup. Now, Shaper's Sanctuary doesn't really help too much against Brotherhood's End, but you know, Brotherhood's End is typically only really run as a 2 or 3 of, and the vast majority of interaction that Rakdos is going to use against you is going to be spot removal like Fatal Push and Molten Impact, so Shaper's Sanctuary seems like it's going to be really good there. I'm also pretty excited to try out Wrenn and Realmbreaker, because like I said, I do think that Planeswalkers are the best way to approach the control matchup, because sweepers are a big issue. Oh yeah, one other thing that I forgot to mention early on here is that Ancient Imperiosaur, you know, we're not just throwing it in this deck to try it out. I do think that this card could actually be a big improvement to the Elf tribe in general, mainly because it makes the deck less vulnerable to Brotherhood's End and Divine Purge. Now, it doesn't really help against Supreme Verdict, obviously, because if you spend a turn convoking this and then the opponent just uses a Supreme Verdict, that's an absolute blowout. But Brotherhood's End, well, first of all, I don't think control is a huge part of the metagame right now. So the main concern in terms of sweepers, in my mind, is probably Brotherhood's End, because I still think like Rakdos and Jund Midrange is very popular. And having this as a threat that we can convoke into play that just doesn't get hit by Brotherhood's End is really huge, right? The big weakness of Elves is your whole deck just gets completely destroyed by Brotherhood's End. So Imperiosaur giving you some insulation against Brotherhood's End seems really nice. And I also think that you know, from what I've seen, most of the control decks are opting to go with the Divine Purge over something like Supreme Verdicts because of decks like Hammer Time and Affinity. And if that is the case, then I think Imperiosaur could also help quite a lot against the control deck as well, because if they are relying on Divine Purge and we can resolve this, particularly if we have an Allosaurus Shepherd in play, they're really going to struggle to deal with this. So I do think Imperiosaur is a nice upgrade. Having said that, you know, if the opponent is running Supreme Verdict, I do think Planeswalkers are a good way to go, particularly because we can get these down on turn 2 off Llanowar Elves or Elvish Mystic. And so I think, we don't want to put it in the main deck, but I think I'm going to try a couple of copies of these in the sideboard. And then we've got 6 Planeswalkers, which seems like it could definitely help quite a lot against the control matchup for sure. And then the last thing I want to add to the deck is something for the Wizards matchup, because having played quite a lot of Elves in Best of 1 and Best of 3, Wizards has always felt like a really tough matchup because they have a lot of early interaction, and Elves typically doesn't have a great way to interact with the opponent. So one card that I've always relied on to improve the Wizards matchup from the Elves side is Cruel Harpooner. And I definitely think I want to be running at least 3 of these because you really want to maximize your chances of drawing these. And this is obviously great because it's a creature, so it plays well with Collected Company and with the Imperiosaur as well. And, it's just great at killing something like a Symmetry Sage and then also just sitting down as a blocker so the opponent can't just attack through, because outside of the Jasper Sentinel, we don't have any creatures that can block flying creatures. So Harpooner, from my experience playing Elves, feels really important as a way to kind of shore up the Wizards matchup. Just quickly editing something in that I forgot to mention in the video, because I imagine I'll probably get a few questions about it, and that is Craterhoof Behemoth. So Fierce Empath has been a card that I've run in Elves in the past in order to tutor up Craterhoof Behemoth. But the big issue with this synergy in previous versions of the deck was that you don't really ever want to run more than a couple copies of Craterhoof. So running more than 2 Fierce Empath means that if you end up drawing your 3rd or 4th copy, they basically do nothing. Obviously, in this particular build of the deck, that's not an issue at all because we've got the 4 Imperiosaur here. So you could potentially just run the single copy of Craterhoof as an additional tutor target off the Empath, but I'm not really sure how often that's going to come up, to be honest, because we only have Elvish Archdruid as a way to cast it. I very much doubt we're going to naturally ever get to 8 mana, so you kind of need to have an untapped Archdruid for Craterhoof to be viable. Now, that might come up, so I am definitely going to pay attention in the games I play to how often that situation is likely to come up, but since we're only running Archdruid and we're not running Circle of Dreams Druid as well, I think the chances of us having a lot of situations where we want to grab the Craterhoof off the Empath is pretty low. So just in terms of space considerations, I'm not going to be running Craterhoof in this particular build, but as I play, I'm definitely going to pay attention to how often this sort of thing comes up. If I was to try and make room for the Craterhoof, I think I would probably go down to the 3rd Jasper Sentinel, but I'm going to start off without the Craterhoof and just see how many instances come up where I would potentially want to tutor it. Anyway, back to the video. So we're already at 15 cards in the sideboard, so I'm pretty happy with how this looks as an initial draft. So what I'm going to do now is just run this through a constructed event, see how we do, talk about potential changes that I might make at the end, and yeah, let's just get straight into the gameplay. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so we're on the play here, and I can't keep a no-lander, unfortunately. Wow, really? I mean, if this Sentinel was like an Llanowar Elves or an Elvish Mystic, then I'd potentially keep that hand, but since it's a Sentinel, I don't think we can risk it, really. So yeah, having to mull to 5 in the first game is pretty rough. Just got to hope the opponent doesn't have a super interactive deck. If the opponent's not on a super interactive deck, we might be alright. Okay, so it looks like opponent's on Affinity, which doesn't really have that much early interaction outside of Portable Hole and Metallic Rebuke, so we could potentially be alright here. If we'd queued into something like Rakdos, we're basically just guaranteed to lose on a mull to 5, but I think against Affinity we've actually got a chance here. Okay, so we can run out the Sentinel first and then the Empath here. And first game, I mean, this is a situation where I would potentially want to have Craterhoof. So interesting. I didn't think this situation would come up that often, because the issue with Craterhoof is that you need to have Archdruid for it to be viable, but as a one-of, maybe the opportunity cost is low enough that it's worth it, because this is a situation where, I mean, we'll see what we draw, but if we'd kept a 7-card hand, I think Craterhoof would have been the better pick there. So after this event, I might add... Yeah, we would have been able to cast the Craterhoof here as well. So I think after this event, I will add just a single Craterhoof, probably over one of the Jasper Sentinels. And And again, it is going to be a little awkward to draw because we are only running Archdruid as a way to ramp into it. But yeah, the very first Empath potentially wanted to be a Crater Hoof. So I do think that is a card I'll be interested in adding after this event. Yeah, it kind of sucks that you can't make changes to a deck while you're in the middle of an event. So opponent has a pretty explosive turn here, so we could be in trouble if they have Nettle Cyst here. I was thinking that Imperiosaur might be able to get the job done, but I don't know. If they have a Nettle Cyst now, it's going to be bigger than our 10-10, which is going to make things really awkward. So I think what I'm going to do here is attack with the Imperiosaur just to start getting some damage through, and then get the second Imperiosaur in. And yeah, this is another situation where, you know, had we had the Crater Hoof, we would have been in a much better spot. So yeah, definitely going to be adding that after this event for sure. So just got to pray the opponent doesn't have a Nettle Cyst here. If we can dodge a Nettle Cyst, I think we've actually got a chance here. And particularly if we can draw like an Allosaurus Shepherd off the top. Although I guess that only busts 2 of our creatures right now. Oh, wow, they do have the Nettle Cyst. So, you know, had we had Crater Hoof, I think we've got a really good chance this game. And also, had we not had to mulligan a bunch, I think we have a better chance as well. So we don't even have good attacks here. So this is pretty rough. Okay, they played Darksteel Citadel and another Ingenious Smith. I mean, we're basically just on a 2-turn clock here. We don't have any way to block in the air. They can just equip the Nettle Cyst to one of their flyers here, assuming they have another mana. Actually, I think they played their land for turn already, but they can just kill next turn, right? They can just equip both Nettle Cyst to one of their flyers. So I think the only way we're going to win this is if the opponent makes a mistake here. I mean, we can activate the War Master here, so maybe we should attack with the War Master and the Empath and her. I mean, the issue with doing that is that if they know what's up, then we're basically guaranteed to lose. But again, I might as well, you know, put them in a position where they can make a mistake here. But I mean, even if they block with the Nettle Cyst token, they can still just equip it to the Thought Monitor next turn anyway. So maybe they could misplay and block with both Thought Monitors, potentially. Or maybe they just let the damage through. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much guaranteed to lose here. But we might as well just, you know, go for a line where the opponent could potentially make a mistake. So now presumably they'll just attach both Nettle Cyst to the Thought Monitor. And they know we don't have any creatures with reach or flying, so wow, they didn't equip. Okay, we get another turn at least. Yikes. Okay, yeah, we just scoop it up here. So that was a bit unfortunate. I think just mulling to 5 put us too far behind there. So there's definitely a matchup for Reclamation Sage for sure. And then I think we can trim on some Sentinels and can probably just trim one of the Fierce Empaths too, and I'm pretty happy to run that back. So yeah, that's pretty interesting that the very first game we kind of wanted the Crater Hoof. Now I will keep it, you know, I'll pay attention to how often that does come up, because I can envisage some situations where we just draw the Crater Hoof naturally and don't have the Archdruid to cast it, but I don't know, I feel like as a one-of, that could have potentially won us that last game, so probably is worth it. And actually, I've just thought of another card that we could potentially be running that I completely forgot about in the deck building process, and that could be Nykthos as a one-of, which could also be another way that we could potentially cast the Crater Hoof. So that could help, you know, increase the amount of games where we can potentially cast it without the Archdruid, which seems pretty nice. So this hand is obviously gas. We get the Archdruid down uncontested. We can then flood the board here, get all of our creatures into play, and then assuming they don't have a portable hole for the Allosaurus Shepherd, we can just, you know, attack for a huge amount of damage. Now, there is potentially an argument to holding the Allosaurus Shepherd here to guarantee the win next turn, even if they have a portable hole. So maybe that would have been better, actually. Because if they portable hole the Allosaurus Shepherd, I mean, we're still in a great spot, even if they do. So they do find the portable hole, but they don't have another white source. So, yeah, I think it probably would, in hindsight, it probably would have been better to just hold on to the Shepherd here to just guarantee lethal. Because if they had the portable hole and they could have cast it, if we hadn't cast the Shepherd, they would have had to use their portable hole on a Sentinel or a Llanowar Elves. So yeah, I mean, that was obviously a night and day difference there. We got off to a fast start. I think this is definitely a good matchup for us for sure. Just game one, we mulling to 5 definitely hurt us. And again, you know, not having Crater Hoof in the deck probably made a difference that game as well. But yeah, last game, thinking about it, I definitely should have held the Allosaurus Shepherd there. I think that was just a little bit greedy to run it out. So one-landers I don't mind keeping, but I think you really need an Elvish Mystic or a Llanowar Elves for it to be worth it. You know, keeping a one-lander with Jasper Sentinel is a little bit too risky, I think. This is kind of slow, especially on the draw, but I think we have to keep this on 6, right? We don't want to go down to 5 again. And this is a hand, you know, we have got a game plan here, right? We can go War Master and then, you know, set up for Empath to find the Imperiosaur, right? And then between War Master and Dwynen's Elite, we should be able to swarm the battlefield pretty quickly. Okay, they do have Portable Hole for the War Master. I mean, thankfully, it looks like the opponent's off to a slow start as well. Okay, 1-drop is perfect there. You know, to be mana efficient, we could have gone Fierce Empath. We could have also gone Rex Sage to get back the War Master, which isn't a bad line either, but I definitely like this. It just helps us develop to the battlefield a little bit quicker, helps us go wider, so when we do play the Empath, we have more stuff on the battlefield to be able to convoke the Imperiosaur. Another Portable Hole takes the second War Master, sure. Okay, there's Ornithopter. So we do need to be wary of Metallic Rebuke here. So I think I would rather run out both Dwynen's Elite, just so if they have the Rebuke, we, you know, don't just waste our whole turn. So now we can get the second Dwynen's Elite out, and now we have enough stuff in the battlefield where if we go for Fierce Empath here, we can immediately convoke the Imperiosaur, which is pretty sick. Interesting, yeah. I think we just go for the Empath line here. Empath, grab the Imperiosaur, convoke it out, and then if they're completely tapped out, so we don't have to worry about the Metallic Rebuke. And then I'm going to manually tap this just because I don't want Arena to auto-tap the Llanowar Elves for mana rather than for the convoke. And now they've got to deal with the 2020. They're stuck on 2 lands as well, so I very much doubt they're going to be able to win this. So yeah, Imperiosaur looking real good here, but like I said, I think I am pretty interested in adding Crater Hoof now after that game 1. So I think we're good to win here, right? They've got to hold back the Ornithopter as a blocker, or we just win by attacking with everything next turn. Wow, they attack. Interesting. Yeah, okay, sweet. We just got there. Nice. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this sounds like sick, right? Turn 1 Elvish Mystic into potentially turn 2 Archdruid into Collected Company is really sick. And then obviously Shepherd to back it up is nice as well. So against the Gigantha deck, which could be a number of things, I think the scariest Gigantha deck from our point of view is probably Wizards. Although we do have the Harpooners in the sideboard, which should help quite a lot. And obviously being on the play is going to be a big deal as well. But either way, just going to run out the Mystic on turn 1 and see what the opponent's on here. God, this Shrine. Okay, so it could be a Reanimator, and they have the Fatal Push, so that's a little bit annoying. Does slow us down a little bit, but we do draw the War Master, so definitely going to run that out, and then we can run out the Archdruid next turn as well, and if that survives, we can really pop off the following turn. Oh, yikes. Okay, Molten Impact's not good to see here, so 2 options here. We either run out the Archdruid or the Allosaurus Shepherd and the Sentinel. Now, there is an argument to not playing anything out while they still have this 2 damage from Molten Impact lying around, but I'm going to run out the Archdruid here. The only thing that really fully punishes us for doing this is if they Thought Seize and then kill the Archdruid with the excess damage. But I don't mind running out the Archdruid last turn because if they have to use a removal spell to kill the Archdruid, then they have to waste the 2 excess damage. Here, turn kind of plays itself, basically. We run all the 3 creatures out, and then we can use the Archdruid to play Collected Company here. Oh, interesting. Okay, so opponents on Showdown of the Scald, Strict Proctor, so I imagine they're also on Croxer. I've seen this deck a few times before. Okay, so I assume they Thought Seize here and kill the Archdruid, but at least we get to go for Collected Company here. So yeah, kill the Archdruid, and then, wow, we get an Archdruid and another Dwynen's Elite, so we basically just get to kill them next turn, I think. assuming they don't have a fatal push here. But yeah, we get to fizzle the excess damage. And yeah, I mean, we just get to win here, right? We attack with everything other than the Archdruid, then use the Archdruid mana to activate the Allosaurus Shepherd. Sick. Okay, so we managed to get there. That was really powerful, obviously. Post-sideboard is obviously going to be more difficult, though, because they're going to have more removal. They're probably going to be brawling in stuff like Brotherhood's End as well, so they look like they're just like a mid-range deck. Like I said, I have seen this deck a few times before, so this is definitely the sort of matchup where we want the Shaper's Sanctuary for sure. I think we can afford to trim on a couple of Sentinels here, and I think I'm happy to trim one of the Empaths as well. And then just going to run it back like that, I think. But yeah, mid-range is always going to be slightly tricky. I think Shaper's Sanctuary is really good in these sorts of matchups. Brotherhood's End is definitely a concern for sure, but you know, Brotherhood's End is typically only run as a 2 or 3 of max in the sideboard, so most of their early interaction is going to be single target removal like Fatal Push and Molten Impact, so Shaper's Sanctuary is definitely the best card in these sorts of matchups. And I also think that the Imperiosaur does help you provide, well, it helps provide some protection against Brotherhood's End, right? If you can convoke it out, then Brotherhood's End will deal with the rest of your board, but you're still left with like a, you know, an 18/18 or 20/20 huge creature with trample that they're really going to struggle to deal with. It also has Ward 2, and, you know, Rakdos typically doesn't run that many pieces of interaction. I guess the opponent's on Mardu, so they could have Fragment Reality as well, but typically, you know, these sorts of mid-range decks struggle to deal with Imperiosaur. We really don't want to mulligan against the Thoughtseize deck, but we can't keep a no-lander, obviously. Definitely going to keep this on 6 against the Thoughtseize deck. Okay, no Thoughtseize on turn 1, but they could very well have Fatal Push here. Okay, looks like they had something, but they're holding on. Maybe they're waiting to play Molten Impact here, potentially. Yeah, okay, that's a little bit annoying. I mean, having said that, you know, I don't mind running out the War Master here, because if they have to use another removal spell to kill the War Master, then they waste the excess damage. If they have a Thoughtseize, though, this is going to be kind of a blowout. But yeah, we'll see what they have here. Okay, there is Croxer, sure. So maybe this is really greedy, but I'm going to discard a land here because I really want to play War Master next turn. And I really don't want to discard the Collected Company as well. Okay, immediately paid off for that. I'm going to attack here first, just so we get in for damage, because if we play the War Master and if they have a Fatal Push, they're likely going to do it in response to this War Master trigger, so I'd rather get in for the 2 damage before they use their removal. Okay, they do have the Fatal Push. I think they should have used it before that token entered the battlefield, because we get a second token now because of that. But at least we have the Collected Company here, which should be, you know, a decent way to get back into the game. Oh, wow. I got another Croxer, so again, I'm going to discard the Forest here, which is... typically, I'm not a big fan of discarding lands to Croxer, because you want to be able to play whatever you top deck, but we have so few cards that cost more than 3 outside of Collected Company that I think it's worth the risk, in this particular spot anyway. Because in this spot, right, if we draw land, we can cast a Collected Company, and if we don't draw land, unless we happen to draw another Collected Company or an Imperiosaur, we're guaranteed to be able to cast what we draw, so yeah, opponent is, you know, we obviously don't want them to get to a point where they can escape Croxer here. Okay, there's Hushbringer, so yeah, the opponent's deck is basically, if it's what I've seen in the past, is basically a mid-range deck that's running Hushbringer and Strict Proctor to enable them to just cast Croxer for 2 mana and not have to escape it, which is the nice synergy. In the deck, it does seem like it would be good. Well, I guess how good the deck is largely depends on how good Hushbringer and Proctor are in the format. And I guess they're, you know, not bad at the moment. It's very good against Goblins. It's very good against Atraxa decks as well. It's going to stop us getting the Dwayne's Elite trigger here as well. So it definitely does do a decent amount of stuff against our deck as well, which is a little bit annoying. You know, shuts off the Fierce Empath, shuts off the War Master trigger as well. And now they're going to be able to escape the Croxer as well, which will get rid of the company. So in a pretty rough spot here. I would have loved to have this Shaper Sanctuary in my opening hands. Wow, okay, interesting. So, I mean, I guess they wouldn't have got the... Actually, yeah, thinking about it, they wouldn't have got the ETB trigger if they'd escaped the Croxer anyway, because of the Hushbringer here, but they had one in hand, so... Basically, it just cost them less mana to do. Okay, sweet. We did find a land, so we can go for Collected Company here, but we're still not in a great spot. Because even if we happen to... Oh, yeah, Fierce Empath doesn't find us anything. Even if we happen to hit, like... Archdruid and Allosaurus Shepherd. That's still not a guaranteed win from this point either. Another showdown. That's a pretty good draw. Yikes, they hit a ton of removal there. Okay, so the attack will definitely collect a company in response, so we don't discard it. Okay, we hit a War Master and a Mystic. Not the best hits, and also we don't get the extra token off the War Master because of Hushbringer as well. And now they can just completely pick apart our board with Molten Impact, although we do have the Shaper's Sanctuary, so if they do choose to do that, we do get to draw some amount of cards. But I feel like it's too late in the game for that to really make a difference now. You know, now they've got a Croxer in play. That's a pretty good draw, though. And I think we can afford to attack with the War Master here. If they want to use Fatal Push, then we get to draw a bunch of cards. Okay, they kill them both. I mean, at least we can cast both the cards from our hand, so we don't have to discard either of them, but we're basically guaranteed to lose here. We just fell too far behind earlier. I think if we had the Shaper Sanctuary in our opening hand, and we were able to draw off their early interaction, we'd have had a lot more gas in the tank, but yeah, that Croxer really started turning the corner in the game really quickly. We'd have obviously loved to draw a non-land there, so we don't take 3 off the Croxer attack. They make a copy of Hushbringer, so presumably that's to sack to the Obnix list there. So yeah, we basically lose here, right? They just casualty the Obnix list plus twice, and then yeah. So that one was a little bit rough. But we did mulligan, and the opponent did have, Molten Impact is obviously very good against us. But having said that, right, if we can get Shaper's Sanctuary down before they start using Molten Impact, that completely shifts the, how much card advantage we get. And being on the play is obviously going to be pretty huge here as well. Just got to hope we don't have to mulligan. Okay, so we'll play first, obviously. And yeah, this hand looks great. Turn 1 Nano Rolls. If they don't have a Fatal Push, we can just go turn 2 Archdruid. If they do, it does slow us down a little bit, but, we can still go for Shepherd into Archdruid on turn 3. Opponent's also mulliganed, which is obviously good for us. Okay, no Fatal Push, but they do have Thoughtseize, so I presume they take the Archdruid here. That doesn't allow us to go for Fierce Empath. Okay, Shaper's Sanctuary, that changes things, so definitely want to get that into play as early as possible here. So now, it's really risky for the opponent to use any of their interaction here. I mean, Strict Proctor is pretty good against Fierce Empath, but we do draw a Collected Company, which is great. So I think I'm just going to ship it back and go for Collected Company during their turn. There is Croxer, so they do get a turn 3 Croxer, which is obviously pretty good. And they attack with the Proctor, sure. So we'll fire off the company here. So definitely want to go for Archdruid, and we don't really want to go for Fierce Empath while they have a Strict Proctor in play, but this potentially just enables us to apply a ton of pressure this turn, right? Oh wait, we could... So if we had... Is this another spot where I kind of wish I had Crater Hoof? I'm not 100% sure. Actually, no, because if we paid 2 for the Proctor, we don't have enough to cast the Crater Hoof here, but I think we do have enough to go for Imperiosaur, so we could attack and pump our board with the Allosaurus Shepherd, but I think while the opponent shields it down, I'd rather just get an Imperiosaur here. So this is a situation where I think we could probably cast Crater Hoof if we had it, but we would have to tap both of the Mana Dorks in order to do so. But either way, I think I like getting Imperiosaur down here. Even if the opponent has like a Brotherhood's End, we still have a 14/14. Basically prevents them from attacking with the Croxer at all. And we also threaten activating the Shepherd next turn as well. If we'd have just gone for the Shepherd activation, we'd have had to discard the Fierce Empath, and, you know, it would have been less of a, you know, our board state would have been less threatening, basically. Okay, they do take out the Shepherd, which stops us activating that next turn, but we did draw the War Master, which we can just activate instead here, right? So we just attack with everything other than the Archdruid. Now we can activate the War Master as well. So unless the opponent has, you know, a lot of interaction here, we should just be good to win, I think. Okay, sick. We got there. Nice. Okay, so we managed to get the 5-0 on the very first event, which is a sick start, obviously. So I beat Blue-White Affinity, Mardu Midrange, then Blue-White Lotus Field Control twice. We queued into the same player twice. And then the final round was basically like an 150 card deck. So that one was basically a free win, but really good start, obviously getting a 5-0. And I learned a lot from this event as well. So let's just check in and see any changes that I would make to the deck. Okay, so what do we think of the deck so far then? Well, I mean, I've been really impressed with how Imperiosaur has been working in the deck. I think it synergizes really well with what Elves want to be doing. Elves, because of cards like Archdruid and Shepherd and War Master, want to be flooding the board, which is perfect for what Imperiosaur wants to be doing anyway. I think Empath has been really, really solid at finding the Imperiosaur. You know, one of the big weaknesses of running a bunch of mana dorks is you can often run into situations where you end up with just a bunch of dorks and not much else going on. If the opponent happens to kill your Archdruid, for example, and having, you know, 4 Imperiosaur, 4 Empath, 4 Collected Company as powerful top-end threats, and I guess Archdruid as well, basically means that because we have such a high density of powerful top-end cards, you're never really likely to get stranded with just the mana dorks, which is really nice. I definitely did learn a lot playing that event though, and there are definitely quite a few changes I want to make to the deck. First of all is adding Crater Hoof. So my initial thoughts with Crater Hoof was that with only Archdruid as a way to feasibly cast it, it probably wouldn't come up that often, and obviously running the single copy, you are going to draw it occasionally, and if you draw it when you don't have an Archdruid, it's going to be pretty difficult to cast, but it came up more often than I thought it would. It already came up, I think, definitely twice where it would have made a big impact, and then a third time where it would have been nice to have access to. So I think because of that, I'm going to try and find room for it. The other card that I forgot about when I was building the deck is Nykthos. I definitely think we can afford to run Nykthos in the mana base, and then that also kind of helps you cast the Crater Hoof, right? Because if we don't have Archdruid and we just have a bunch of mana dorks, we can often just use the Nykthos to be able to ramp into the Crater Hoof as well. So this is another way that we can potentially pay for it. And we also do, you know, we are running 12 mana dorks and the Castle Garenbrig, so it's not impossible for us to just, you know, get a bunch of lands, get a bunch of mana dorks, and then just hard cast it off the Castle Garenbrig anyway. Now, we will have to make a cut in order to fit Crater Hoof. I definitely don't think we can go below 20 lands, especially if we're adding Nykthos, which doesn't produce green until later in the game. So we're definitely going to have to look at cutting one of the non-lands in the deck, and I think the cut for me would probably Sentinel. Now, I have been happy with 4 Sentinel. You know, like I said, I think the hands where you have a 1 mana dork are so much better than the ones where you don't. So you really want to maximize your chances of having at least one of these. But I definitely think we can trim on a Sentinel here to be able to find room for the Crater Hoof. So I like this change quite a lot. I think, you know, being able to find it off the Empath is nice, because the one weakness of this build over the more all-in Imperiosaur builds is that we don't have a way to give the Imperiosaur haste, but we can still win off the Empath just by grabbing Crater Hoof in situations where we can cast it off the Archdruid or Nykthos. So I do like this swap after having played for a little bit. The other swap that I want to make is I realised I don't have any Graveyard Hate in the sideboard, which was just an oversight when I was building the original deck. So because of that, and because I don't really think we have that many cards we want to cut against control, I think I'm just going to go down to 4 Planeswalkers and then put 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate in the sideboard. So I actually think that Ren and Realmbreaker could be a good option. So what I'm going to do here is just run a 2-and-2 split of Ren and Realmbreaker and Freyalise, and then if we want additional cards for the control matchup, we can also board in some amount of Shaper Sanctuary. I don't think we need 6 Planeswalkers, so I think I'm happy with cutting that. And then we have quite a few options for Graveyard Hate. So the main ones I'm looking here as options are Scavenging Ooze and then the Artifact-based Graveyard Hate. So we've got Tormod's Crypt, Soul Guide Lantern, and Unlicensed Her. So the main considerations here. And I'll quickly go over the pros and cons of each of them. Just quickly put them in here as options. So Scavenging Ooze, the really nice thing about Ooze in this particular list here is that it's a creature, which means that it plays really nicely with both Collected Company and the Imperiosaur as well, right? We can use it to convoke, and we can get it into play off Collected Company, which is really nice. The downsides of Scavenging Ooze, though, is that it's a lot more vulnerable to interaction, especially post-sideboard. The opponent's likely to be bringing more creature removal against you, and against the matchups where Graveyard Hate matters, like Kethis combo, is it Phoenix, Reanimator, having your Graveyard Hate be killable by a Fatal Push is a pretty big drawback. And additionally, my big problem with Scavenging Ooze is that it's often just too slow, particularly if you go second, because a lot of the Graveyard decks are interacting with their graveyard on turn 3, right? So if you're against Phoenix, they can go, consider Faithless Looting, bring back the Phoenixes from the graveyard. If you're against Reanimator, they can go turn 2 Priest of Fell Rites, turn 3 discard a Serra's Emissary, get it back. And if you're going second, you play a Scavenging Ooze on turn 2, you don't have any mana to activate it. So for those reasons, I don't really think the Scavenging Ooze is good enough in Historic. I think it's just too slow. So even though it does synergize really well with our main game plan, I'm not a big fan of Scavenging Ooze for those reasons. And then the other options we've got, Tormod's Crypt, Soulguide Lantern, and Unlicensed Hearse. The big advantage of Tormod's Crypt is 0 mana, so it doesn't interfere with our curve in any way, which is really nice, particularly in a very fast deck like this. Being able to go turn 1 Nano Rolls and Tormod's Crypt, then we have the Graveyard Hate in play, and we didn't have to take any spots off on our curve to cast it. The drawback of Tormod's Crypt, though, is that it's pretty bad in multiples, so I'm pretty happy normally to run the first copy, but I don't really want to be running more than that, really. Soulguide Lantern is a card that is, similar to Tormod's Crypt, is single-use Graveyard Hate. It does cost more mana, so you do have to take some spots off on your curve to be able to cast it, but the nice thing about Soulguide Lantern is it's good to run in multiples because you can cycle it away pretty easily. And then Unlicensed Hearse is, the advantage it's got over these two is it's repeatable. So, the opponent can't just force you to crack it and then have their graveyard available for the rest of the game. The big drawback of Unlicensed Hearse, especially in a deck like this, is that you have to take 2 mana off to be able to cast it. But on the flip side, we are also a deck that can produce a lot of mana, right? We have mana that we can produce off Mystic, Llanowar Elves, and Archdruid. So I think, typically in aggro decks, I like going for Tormod's Crypt, Soulguide Lantern, because it just doesn't, it doesn't... You don't have to take spots off on your curve to be able to cast it. But I actually don't mind Hearse in this particular list because we're producing a lot of mana anyway. Now, the other thing we have to take into consideration is Kethis combo. I do think Tormod's Crypt and Soulguide Lantern are much better against Kethis combo because Unlicensed Hearse is often too slow. So I'm going to start off with Tormod's Crypt, Soulguide Lantern, but I think it's pretty close and I wouldn't fault you for running Unlicensed Hearse at all. So anyway, I've made these changes. What I'm going to do next is just run it back through another constructed event and see how we do. So I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this hand looks good. I probably would like to have 1 less land ideally, but pretty decent game plan here. We got turn 1 Mystic into potentially turn 2 Empath to find Imperiosaur. Then turn 3 Collected Company. As long as we get good hits off the company, we could potentially get down Imperiosaur on turn 4, which seems pretty good. So opponent's mulligan once. Okay, sweet, here we go. So run out the Mystic on turn 1. It would be a bit of a roadblock if the opponent has removal for the Mystic here. It does slow our hand down quite a bit, but... Okay, sweet. We get to untap with the Mystic, which is pretty huge. So definitely just going to slam the Empath here. Basic Island from the opponent. Not 100% sure what we're up against here. Could be Control, could be like, is it Phoenix or is it Wizards potentially? But yeah, definitely going to grab the Imperiosaur here. And we'll just ship it back. Looks like the opponent has something here. So if I had to guess, the opponent having a... Well, I guess it doesn't really change things because that could be like a Consider or Opt if they're playing blue-red. It could also be like a Censor potentially if they're playing blue-white, which it looks like they are, right? So probably against Control. Now we've seen Glacial Fortress. So I think we're just going to attack with the Empath here. We could go for the main phase Collected Company, but the fact the opponent had priority with just a single blue mana there makes me think they might have Censor, in which case I would rather wait until their end step to fire off the company. Okay, so they don't have triple blue, so we don't have to worry about Archmage's Charm. But like I said, I don't think there are many cards in blue-white that cost a single blue unless they're running Opt, which they could be, not having open deck list on ladder does mean they could have it. Okay, yeah, they did have Censor. Kind of makes sense. So, we could go for company main phase, but I feel like we just basically lose if they have a sweeper. There's definitely an argument to holding back the Mystic here as well, but, because if we pass here, I'm going to pass and go for Collected Company. So, there is definitely an argument to maybe holding back the Mystic in case they have a second Censor, but I don't want to miss damage potentially. Although I think it's close, there is definitely a reasonable argument to holding back the Mystic here to play around another Censor or Dry Disruption. So opponent obviously thinking about something here. Yeah, thinking about it, maybe it was a bit greedy because 1 damage versus potentially having Collected Company countered is a pretty big difference. So in hindsight, I probably should have just taken a bit more time over it, but I think it was probably better to hold back the Mystic there, because if we get hit by another Censor, that could have a huge impact here. Okay, it resolves. That's pretty sick. And we hit Archdruid Warmaster, which is really good. So we have a number of options here. We could potentially activate the Warmaster and not have to worry about committing any more to the board. But then if they do have a sweeper, we kind of get stranded with Imperiosaur in hand. So there's definitely also an argument to trying to cast the Imperiosaur here, although we do then miss out on damage as well. So pretty close here. But yeah, thinking about it, I definitely should have probably just not attacked with the Mystic, because thankfully they didn't have another Censor, but had they had it, it puts us really far behind, and I don't think it's worth trading 1 damage for that. So opponent's still in the tank here. Or maybe they're disconnected, not sure. But yeah, maybe they're thinking about potentially killing the Archdruid before we get to untap with it, which would make sense. So I can tell they're still here because they're hovering over stuff. But it looks like they're going to time out if they don't play something quickly. Okay, they time out, so we've got a few options here. I think I'm just going to go for Empath because we can potentially go for Crater Hoof here, right? So if they don't have a counter spell, then we can potentially just win this turn. Wow, they Typhoon for X equals 1. Maybe just to get a blocker in play, maybe? And then they march the Warmaster, exiling to Fairy. I mean, I think we should still be good to win here, right? We still have enough mana to go for the Crater Hoof, so we're immediately getting paid off for adding the Crater Hoof to the deck here. Because giving the control deck another turn to potentially find a sweeper could just instantly lose us this game. So very glad that we added the Crater Hoof. It's already paying off. So against control here, we definitely want to bring in the Planeswalkers. And then honestly, I'm not really sure what else we want to cut here, to be honest. So I am kind of glad that we moved down to 4 Planeswalkers because there isn't really that much stuff we actively want to cut here. So just trying to think what we would do want to cut. We can definitely trim on Sentinels a little bit, I think. Even though Crater Hoof won that last one, I don't know. Maybe I might just trim the Imperiosaurs down to 1, because we can still tutor both of them off the Fierce Empath. And Imperiosaur, if we don't have Allosaurus Shepherd, does seem like a little bit of a liability, because they can just, if we convoke it and they counter, that's kind of a blowout. And then, just trying to think whether I also want to, either bring in Shaper's Sanctuary or potentially bring in more Imperiosaurs. I think I'm going to trim an Empath here and bring in 1 Shaper's Sanctuary, because I feel like Shaper's Sanctuary, the first copy does provide a good amount of value, particularly, we are obviously worried about sweepers, which is why I brought the Planeswalkers in, but they are going to have a decent amount of single target removal as well. So I think the first copy of Shaper's Sanctuary should be pretty good. But yeah, I'm very happy that we added the Crater Hoof there, because it's already come up multiple times, a lot more often than I thought it would anyway. And I also think it kind of mitigates the weakness of this particular build, not being able to give the Imperiosaur haste, which is pretty important. So this is actually quite a close hand. I could definitely see mulliganing it. I think there's always a good argument with Elves to mulligan any hand that doesn't have a turn 1 mana dork, but oh wow, okay, we just drew one off the top. But with Company and Ren and Realm Breaker, I do think that this is, even though we're on the draw, I do think we can potentially get there, because if they don't happen to have a counter spell, which they you know, as the control deck, I could very easily see keeping a hand with just removal, then getting to resolve a Ren and Realm Breaker is going to be pretty huge. I mean, I've not been able to resolve it against control yet, but it seems like it should be really good, right? It constantly producing a threat that has Hexproof and Vigilance, so it can't get hit by stuff like Wandering Emperor. And then, you know, the -2 being able to get back any elf from your graveyard, and then it does approach the ultimate pretty quickly as well. So I think I'm going to attack first here with the War Master, try and bait out removal if they want to use it to try and clear the way for the Ren and Realm Breaker. So they've only got 2 mana here. They would need like a Veto or Censor to stop this. And I very much doubt they've, you know, kept Veto in against us because we have so few non-creatures other than Collected Company. I guess they could also have changed the equation though. Looks like they got something. Wow, it resolves. Sick. Okay, so I think I'm going to plus here, because the minus without anything in the graveyard seems a little bit risky, but I'm not going to actually animate a land, because if they have Divine Purge, I mean, I guess they're running Portable Hold, so that probably means they're not running Divine Purge, but there's no real benefit here to... Oh, they just have a Fateful Absence. Okay, that's a bit annoying. But there's no real benefit to animating a land just in case they do have a Divine Purge, because we can't attack with it or anything. Okay, so they tap out. They're missing land drops again, which is obviously rough for the opponent, but that clears the way for us to resolve another Ren and Realm Breaker, and now we can actually start applying pressure with the +1 here, which is nice. Even though the Ren and Realm Breaker did die to Fateful Absence, I still think I'm happy with the +1 last turn, because Fateful Absence is literally the only card we get punished by. And threatening the ultimate does seem pretty good. Plus, there's always the chance that you don't get anything great off the minus as well. I think you probably want to start going for that once you have actively good targets in your graveyard. Oh, okay, Archdruid is a nice one. So that buffs the War Master, produces a token. Again, I don't want to overcommit to the board when they could, you know, they've obviously got a stacked hand because they're missing land drops, so they could very well have like Plains into Divine Purge or Deserted Beach into Divine Purge. I mean, again, because they're running Portable Hold, that is a little bit of a non-bo, but I could see a world in where they're running both. Okay, so they marched the War Master. Interesting they went for that over the Archdruid. I guess it would cost them more mana to go for the Archdruid, so maybe they have a two mana piece of interaction here they want to use. Okay, they're hovering over the Ren. Oh, they Aether Gust. Oh, okay, I think opponent messed up here. They should have waited until after I'd drawn, because now we just draw the Ren and Realm Breaker and we have exactly lethal. So I imagine the opponent meant to let us draw and then gust the Ren and Realm Breaker. I mean, I think we're still so far ahead that we probably would have won this anyway, but yeah, I mean, Ren felt great there, and Craterhoof came up as well, so I'm pretty happy with the changes here. Okay, so we're going second here. And I can't keep this, obviously too many lands. So I'm going to have to ship this one back, unfortunately. Okay, this one's better for sure. Interesting what we're going to put back here. I think it's between Allosaurus Shepherd and a Forest. I think with the Imperiosaur in hand already, we want to keep a high density of creatures, particularly 1-drops. And if the Llanowar Elves lives here, we can swarm the board pretty quickly, right? We can go turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 War Master plus Shepherd. Okay, now we've drawn a Mystic, we can go turn 2 War Master plus Mystic, which gets, 4 bodies on the battlefield straight away. Then if the War Master survives, we can go for Allosaurus Shepherd, which puts another another token in play, and then we can potentially also convoke the Imperiosaur next turn. So if the opponent doesn't have a piece of removal here, we can just convoke the Imperiosaur into play next turn, which seems pretty sick. Chromatic Lantern, okay, interesting. Oh, actually, looking at the size of the opponent's deck, it looks like they're on like a 150 card deck or something like that. So probably not the most, probably not the best test in terms of competitiveness. But with this sort of deck, I think it is definitely still useful to just see how the deck goldfishes. Because, this isn't the most interactive deck, so just playing games like this to see how quickly you can kill the opponent is very useful. I mean, having said that, if they happen to have a sweeper here, we're in big trouble. If they have like a Wrath of God or something. But if they don't, we're basically, we have two ways to win. Even if they have a piece of spot removal for the Imperiosaur, we can still activate the Shepherd here because of Castle Garenbrig. So this kind of highlights how important Garenbrig is at allowing us to activate the Shepherd. Wow, Grim Bounty the Warmaster. Okay, so we're basically guaranteed to win next turn now. Okay, sick. And we drew the Nykthos as well, so now we should be able to activate the Shepherd without having to tap the Mana Docks, which is also pretty nice. So yeah, we'll attack here. If the opponent doesn't use a piece of removal, we'll just let the damage through. If they do, we can just pump our whole board with the Shepherd as well. Okay, sweet. So got the Imperiosaur out pretty quickly on a mole there, which was pretty nice. I mean, again, opponents on like a 150 card deck, so not the best test for the deck competitively, but like I said, this is the sort of deck where just playing these sorts of games to goldfish does give you a decent idea of how consistent and fast the deck can be as well. So just going to run it back. I think on the draw, I don't mind keeping this. One landers in a 20 land deck are going to happen, and as long as you've got an Elvish Mystic or a Llanowar Elves, and some sort of backup plan if the Elvish Mystic dies, then I don't mind keeping a one lander, particularly on the draw where we have more looks at the second land. I don't mind keeping it. I mean, obviously, ideally you want to have at least 2 lands, but on the draw with a Mystic and a Jasper Sentinel, I think it's probably fine to keep a one-lander, particularly because we have, a bunch of one-drops and the Imperiosaur. So opponent does have something for 1 mana here. Otherwise, Arena would just skip straight through to the end of the turn. Okay, perfect. We drew the extra land, which is great. Now we can just run out our 3 one-drops, and then we can potentially Imperiosaur next turn if we draw another land, right? I don't know if Garenbrig doesn't work with Convoke, right? I think you need to have 4 actual mana. Yeah, okay. So we can Collected Company here, though. So I think we're just going to ship the turn back. Because if we Collected Company and hit 2 Dwaylen's Elites, that's still not quite enough to Convoke the Imperiosaur. So I think we're better off waiting until the opponent's turn. Wow, the Egon just sacked itself automatically. I guess they did draw a card off that, but see what else they got here. Okay, Essica. So we'll just fire off the company here, see what we hit. If we can hit our... okay, so I was going to say, if we can hit an Archdruid, we can potentially just cast the Crater Hoof and just win immediately here. So, very happy we added the Crater Hoof to the deck. And yeah, this just shows the deck can goldfish really quickly if the opponent doesn't have any interaction. Yeah, sweet, we got there. So nice, that's another 5-0. Now, obviously, this event was, much softer competition, but still got a good idea that I like the changes that I've made to the list so far. So yeah, sweet, got another 5-0. Let's just check in with the deck at the end, see what we think. Okay, so overall, I'm really happy with the changes I made to the deck. I think Crater Hoof has come up a surprising amount of times. I was definitely wrong about this when I was making the initial build of the deck. So Crater Hoof, really happy with this addition for sure. Nykthos also came up quite a few times every time I drew it, so definitely happy with this as a one-off as well. And then sideboard-wise, definitely happy we added the Graveyard Hate. Didn't come up in any of the matches I tested, so there's still a chance that Unlicensed Hearse might be better than Tormod's Crypt and Soul Guide Lantern, but I'm going to leave it as these for now, just because I feel like I prefer these two, particularly against Kethis combo, which can be a tricky matchup, and it interferes with your curve less as well. Typically, these sorts of, typically Unlicensed Hearse is going to be better in games that tend to want to play a longer game, where the repeated activations are good and it turns into a threat as well. But this deck is so fast and linear that I think we're probably better off with the slightly cheaper options for Graveyard Hate. The only other change that I'm tempted to make from that last event that I played is potentially going up on Ren and Realmbreaker and down on Freyalise, because I was really impressed with how Ren and Realmbreaker played against the control deck. The big issue I've got with Freyalise is that it doesn't really impact the board. I mean, obviously it does give your creature in play +1/+1 and the one in your hand, but the main reason that we're running Planeswalkers in the sideboard against control is to have stuff that survives board sweepers. But the issue with Freyalise is that if the opponent does use a sweeper, you have to either have minused repeatedly to get elves into your hand to then cast to recover from the sweeper, or if you keep trying to +1 to get to the ultimate basically does nothing if you don't have any elves in play either. So Freyalise, I think, is obviously very good against control, but I kind of prefer Ren and Realmbreaker because of the +1 being able to just apply pressure immediately, right? It applies pressure to the board. The land that you animate has both hexproof and vigilance, so it can't be hit by the spot removal, can't be exiled by Wandering Emperor. The -2 gives you much better card selection than something like the Freyalise -1 as well. So I actually think I'm going to go up at least 1 Ren and Realmbreaker. I could see going up to 4, but I do think there's diminishing returns on playing 4 because you obviously can't cast them both at once. So I think what I'm going to do here is go up to 3 Ren and Realmbreaker and go down to 1 Freyalise, because obviously you don't really want to be drawing multiple Ren and Realmbreakers, and the nice thing about running a single copy of Freyalise is if you do happen to draw both the Freyalise and the Ren and Realmbreaker, you can cast them both together, but maybe there's a chance that Ren and Realmbreaker is just better, because I do think the ability to just repeatedly apply pressure to the board straight away is a lot better for what we want it for, right? Which is basically just to recover from sweepers slightly easier. So that's the only real change I'd make to the deck from that last event. I think I'm really happy with this list so far. It feels really nice. Imperiosaur has been great at giving the deck something else to do. Also giving the deck, importantly, kind of insulation against Brotherhood Zen and Divine Purge, which are, in my mind, the 2 most commonly played sweepers. And so I definitely think that this is a real upgrade to the deck. I've been trying to get elves to work in best of 3 for a while. Started off with Karn builds, tried Tyvar for a little bit as well, and it didn't really feel like it solved a lot of the issues with the deck. And I do genuinely think Imperiosaur does, because it gives the deck a good way to, more insulation to Brotherhood Zen and Divine Purge, like I said. And then, there's tons of cross synergy here. Really happy with the sideboard so far as well. Managed to fit in basically everything I want for the matchups. I mean, ideally, maybe I'd want a little bit more graveyard hate, but I think I'm pretty happy with this build, and I'm definitely going to keep working on this. Probably going to start grinding with it on the ladder next season as well, see how high I can get with it. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think of the deck, if you've got any suggestions that you could potentially improve it with, and I'll catch you on the next video. Big up.